I'd like to introduce you to Dan Free, my colleague Dan, who is a tremendous wildlife enthusiast. Dan has travelled to many, many countries around the world, following his passion, which is to look for and be with, explore, enjoy wildlife. I know that because he's told me about all the amazing places that he's been to, and I'm sure there are many more to come too. But one of the places that Dan is most passionate about is Botswana. And there can be nobody better qualified to talk to us about Botswana this evening than Dan. So Dan, I'm going to propose that you unmute your mic and that we crack on and you chat to everyone about Botswana. At the end of the evening, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, which I will pose to Dan. If you want to message me during the course of this chat, this presentation, then I'll see them on chat and I'll pose the questions to Dan. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. That's very kind of you. As you've touched on there, Chris, I've worked in the industry now for about 10 years, and prior to that, I worked as an ecologist for a number of years, studied zoology at uni and all of that. And it's fair to say that I'm a massive wildlife geek. And I have been fortunate enough to travel to some incredible places. But for me, kind of hand on heart, I don't think it gets any better than Botswana. Now, I've been lucky enough to visit the country on numerous occasions over the last 10 years. But I think probably more significant than that, I've also overseen literally dozens, if not hundreds, of trips to the country, both on our small group trips and also on our tailor-made trips. And the feedback from the clients and everything that you hear from them, that really helps to build up a very good understanding of the country's wildlife. Now, in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to run through a series of slides that will hopefully give you a flavour for the country and give you an indication as to why I rate it so highly. Now, I'm not a fan of using kind of stock images, and so all of the images you'll see tonight were either taken by my wife or indeed by clients travelling on our trips. And where possible, I'll try and give you a little bit of context just to, with regard to the sighting. Now, as I've touched on, hold on, we'll try and flick to the next slide. There we go. As I've confessed, I am a geek. I'm a massive geek, and I like to start a talk with a few facts and figures. And for me, that's particularly important for Botswana, as it helps to give you some context as to why it is such a special country for wildlife. So first up, as you all know, it's located in southern Africa, and it's a landlocked country. And it occupies an area of over 500,000 square kilometres, so that's over twice the size of the UK. But crucially, it only has a population of 2.2 million. And that is in comparison to the 66 million that we have here living in the UK. So it's over twice the size, but just 3% of the population. Now, if we take that further, nearly 40% of the country falls within either national parks, game reserves, or wildlife management areas. And these areas provide refuge to about 170 species of mammal and over 600 species of bird. It's an absolutely fabulous country for wildlife. And climatically, it's largely quite warm, quite hot in places, and very dry for much of the year. But it does receive seasonal rains in late November through December, January, and into February. But significantly, in the north of the country, it also receives water from the Angolan highlands. And this drains down into what is known as the Okavango Delta, one of the best places for wildlife anywhere in the world. And this water supply just creates an oasis for wildlife, and it offers some of the best wildlife viewing anywhere on the planet. And it's where we're going to kick off tonight's talk, before then going on to the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, which is further south. I'll try and use the laser pointer just down here. And then we're going to conclude in the Makadi and Naipan National Park, which just sits in the middle. So we've got the Delta up here, and then CKGR down here, and then Makadi just over here. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I'd like you just to kind of consider the Okavango Delta and the layout of the land. Now, At the heart of the delta, you've got Moremi Game Reserve, this area here, and this occupies an area of around 5,000 square kilometres. And then it adjoins the Chobe National Park, which is off to the east, and this is around 11,000 square kilometres. So it's a vast, vast area in itself. But these areas are also surrounded by huge concessions or wildlife management areas, which are managed by various wildlife lodges and eco lodges. And collectively, that just makes an absolute huge area that is protected for wildlife and just a massive expanse of wilderness. And that's what makes Botswana so special. Now, this is a classic view of the delta in flood. And this is when the water from the Angolan highlands has drained down over 1,000 kilometres via the Okavango River down into the delta and spread out over the floodplains. It's an absolutely beautiful sight. And it can take several months for this water to make that journey. And then depending on where you are in the delta, the water levels will peak either between May and August, before then later kind of retreating as the dry season continues. And now this creates a mosaic of habitats. You've got these fabulous floodplains, and then you've got little islands of woodland, and then as it dries, you've got these big expanses of grassland, and it's just absolutely super for wildlife. Now, one of the joys of getting to the delta is a flight into the delta, a low-level flight. And you travel in a small little aircraft like this, maybe slightly larger, and it's an absolute joy. They'll fly at quite a low altitude, and you can look down over the terrain, you can see the mammals down there, and it really is a very exciting start to the trip. If you get the opportunity, I would advise taking such a flight. If I'm honest, we tend to avoid them on our group trips, largely because you can access the delta very easily from Maun. It's about a 2 or 3 hour drive. And this means that we can take a bit more baggage with us. On these flights, you tend to be restricted to around 20 kilos in total, including your hand baggage. So that can be a bit restrictive, but you can find a way of working around that if you're keen to do this, and it's a fabulous experience. Now, once you arrive in the delta, you've got a variety of activities available to you, and you've got your classic kind of game drives, which will be undertaken in a vehicle like this, a Land Cruiser or perhaps a Land Rover. There's also the option for Makuru canoe rides, and this is a wooden dugout canoe, and it's an incredibly peaceful and relaxing way to explore the myriad of waterways around the delta. And finally, you've also got the option of walking safaris, and it's very often possible to combine all three activities, and they all offer a very different experience. Now, I have to admit, I love being out in the vehicle, driving around and seeing what you bump into. And I like the fact that the vehicles allow you to get a bit closer to the animals, and they're very good for photography. My wife's a keen photographer. We'll see a lot of her photos today. But there's something quite special about being out on foot as well. There's a vulnerability to it. And yes, you're not going to get so close to the animals, but it's an opportunity to look at the landscape in a different way, to pay more attention to the smaller stuff, to look at the botany, to look at the tracks and the trails and the scat. And, there is a chance of seeing some of these large mammals that exist in the delta. So again, it's a fabulous activity. You can't undertake it in the national parks. They're quite restrictive in terms of their activities. So you need to visit one of the private concessions that I mentioned earlier. Finally, the canoes, they are just delightful. It's kind of a specialty of the delta. It's a very peaceful way to explore, and if you're out in the middle of the day or the late afternoon, very often the animals will be coming down to drink, and you can get some a completely different perspective of the animals. Now, Botswana is very well known for being a premium safari destination, and the country has kind of adopted a policy of quality over quantity, and it's not unusual for some of the lodges to charge well in excess of $1,000 per night per person in the high season. It's an awful lot of money, but what you get in return is an incredibly exclusive experience. That the visitor number will be very, very low, the density will be very low, and you have these areas to yourself, and it is amazing. And that high season is really from June through to October. However, if you're willing to travel in the low season, which would be when the rains are around, so probably from December through till March, then the rates do come down enormously. And likewise, if you can go perhaps in the shoulder season, which would be November or April, then those rates fall somewhere between the low and the high. And it still offers fantastic, viewing for the wildlife. This is just a picture of a lodge that we use. It's called Sable Alley Lodge, and hopefully we'll be visiting it later this year on our Festival of Cats. It's an absolutely beautiful lodge, and it's set on a private concession of 250,000 hectares. So it's a vast, vast area. And being on that concession, we have the freedom to drive where we like, to do the walks, to do the boat trips and stuff. So it's an absolutely delightful place to stay if you've got a budget. Obviously, there's all those activities to undertake, but there's a lot to be said just for hanging out at the lodge and just sitting back and just enjoying the wildlife that's to be seen from the decking there. It is an amazing experience, but it's not realistic for everyone. Those types of prices which you can see in the Delta, and we get a lot of questions about this. And yes, you can travel slightly out of season, and that will make it a bit more competitive. But failing that, the other option you can consider is luxury mobile camping. And if I'm honest, this is how I prefer to travel in Botswana. I absolutely love it. It's still very, very comfortable. You've got walk-in tents, they're Meru tents, so they're a good size. You've got a proper bed there, you've got the bedside tables, you've got lighting overhead, and there's the bathroom facilities out the back. It's only a bucket shower, and the guys heat up the water on request. You've got a wash basin and mirror, so you've got the basics, but it does make it a bit more competitively priced, and it's just a delightful way to visit the Delta and to be accommodated. The meals are all taken out in the bush, either under canvas like this or under the night sky, and these guys that are travelling with you, your camp crew, they're absolute geniuses, and the chef in particular, the meals which he's able to prepare, over an open fire, is fantastic. And I've had everything from kind of roast chicken to fish to pasta dishes, salads, burgers on occasion. And you've always got fresh bread and biscuits. So, you certainly won't go hungry. And it's all fully serviced. So you're very well looked after. You don't have to lift a finger. The guys pack up all the tents. You'll go out for a long game drive. They'll travel ahead of you. Then they'll set everything up and you'll arrive and it'll all be sorted. And it's brilliant. There's something very special about camping out in the bush, falling asleep, to the sounds of the bush, and not knowing that there's nothing between you but a sheet of canvas. As long as you lock your tents up, you're absolutely fine. But it's a fabulous way to experience the Delta. This is a photo actually from my first trip 10 years ago, and as you might expect, the fire is the hub of the campsite. This is kind of the meeting point for everyone. You'll convene here first thing in the morning and last thing in the day as well, gather around for drinks and breakfast and food and so forth. This was at the end of my first day in the Delta. You can just see in the background, those tents that we were using then are much more simple than what we have now, but you've just got an elephant passing by, and it's not unusual to have this wildlife passing through the camp. In fact, this is actually a camera trap image of that same scene, but just a slightly different angle. And you can see in the top right there, there's a glimmer of light, and that's actually the campfire. And we had gone to bed at this point, but this is an image that was captured overnight, and it's two male lions walking through the camp, not 30 meters from where we were sat. So it's really, really quite incredible. Now, the potential range of animals in the Delta is mind-blowing, and it includes an enormous range of herbivores and predators. Now, what we've got here are red lechwe, and they're probably one of the most common antelope species you'll see in the Delta. They're nearly always found near water, feeding almost exclusively on grasses and sedges, and it's not uncommon to encounter herds of 20, 30, 40, even 100 red lechwe. And they've got very soft hooves, so they're almost entirely restricted to these wetter areas. As we move away from the wetter areas into the more firmer kind of substrate, we find impala, and this is a very common antelope species, and it's one which is easily overlooked, but it's actually a very beautiful animal. They're much more generalist in their diet, so they're able to graze on the grass, they're able to browse on the bushes and on the trees, and you'll see them standing up on their hind legs. But they're a very frequent sight throughout the Delta. And this large shaggy animal is a water bug. It's not the most attractive of creatures, but It's a frequent sight in the delta, often in herds of 6 to 20 animals. You very often actually kind of smell them before you see them. They've got a really kind of goaty odor to them, and a lot of the guides will tell you that the predators avoid them because of this musky smell. But if you look at the stats and the data, which I like to do because I'm okay, just a slight technical hitch there. Hopefully I was just muted for a moment. As this kind of picture depicts, this lone male wildebeest. Wildebeest, they are located in the delta, and they're found relatively commonly, but you don't find them in the huge numbers that you may find, for example, in East Africa. And it's often just small breeding herds of 10 to 15 animals, or lone bulls like this, just trying to hold territory. And they are frequently found alongside, excuse me guys, there's a slight technical problem there, alongside zebra. And again, the zebra in the delta, they're dispersed over a wide area. So they're usually found in small herds of 20 or 30 animals. And like I say, not uncommon for them to be alongside the wildebeest. Red hartebeest, they can be found out on the grasslands, and despite its kind of ungainly appearance, they are actually quite athletic. They can reach speeds of 60 to 70 kilometers an hour, and if they're threatened and if they're being pursued by a predator, they will zigzag their way across the grasslands. And the youngsters, if they can't keep up, they just fall away and just fall into the grass and will take their chances there. It's quite a magnificent thing to watch. I've been lucky enough to witness this on a couple of occasions. This beautiful animal is a sable antelope, and it's one which tends to be found more in the savanna woodland rather than in the wetter areas of the delta. And it's just a magnificent animal. You won't see huge numbers of these, but when you do see them, they are very special. And finally, right, we've got buffalo here. The delta is full of buffalo. You've got herds of a couple hundred, anything up to a couple thousand on occasions. And they're generalists. They will eat whatever vegetation they can hold of, really, and they have to eat about 20 kilos a day. So it's widely reported that buffalo can't be sustained anywhere that doesn't produce more than 250 mils of rain a year. Now they're a formidable animal. They can motor up to about 50 kilometers an hour, and when they are in these breeding herds, they really are quite a sight. The delta being as wet as it is, and with so much water, there's obviously very good numbers of hippo. And whilst they reside largely in the water or just by the edge of the water during the daytime, as darkness falls, they will roam further afield in pursuit of grazing. And they've been known to walk up to 20 or 30 kilometers a night. Now, it's also reputed that hippos are kind of one of the most dangerous animals in Africa, and this is largely because when they are out walking at night, if you spook them, if you come across them, they will just make a beeline for the water. And if you happen to be standing in the way, it doesn't tend to end too well. Giraffe, as you might expect, is an iconic mammal of Africa. They're common out in the grasslands, usually in small numbers, but there's nothing better than just watching a giraffe pacing across the grasslands. And certainly as you get up away, to the northeast of the delta up towards Chobe, that they become quite prolific up there. Interestingly, they're very specialist in terms of the vegetation they feed on. They've been recorded feeding on over 100 different species, but they will specifically choose the most nutritious leaves. And because of this, and because of a very efficient stomach, their stomachs are only half the size of a buffalo. So it's a little interesting bit of trivia for you. Now, for me, the delta is one of the best places in the world to see elephant. It's just brilliant, and the sightings you get are of very high quality. The animals, for the most part, are quite used to having the vehicles around, and you can just sit there and observe them. One of the joys of watching elephants is watching them come down to drink in the middle of the day. They prefer just to drink once a day, and when they do, they'll drink big, and they'll drink about 100 litres in a sitting. And after they've filled themselves with water, they will play and mess around, and just the interaction that you get between the animals, they're so intelligent, there's so much communication going on between them. You can never tire of of watching elephants. Now, with such a wealth of herbivores present in the area, there will inevitably be predators. And for me, I'm going to say it again, the Delta has offered the best predator sightings I've had anywhere in Africa. Due to the abundance of prey, the lions that occur here can often be found in prides of up to 20, 30, maybe even 40 individuals. Now, as you all know, lions spend a lot of their time sleeping. When they are active, they're fascinating to watch. This is a female that we encountered just in Moremi, just in the early morning light. She's absolutely beautiful. She was out hunting, wasn't successful, and they were later joined by some cubs. And you never really get tired of watching the cubs. They're just so cute, and there's so much behaviour between them as well. They made their way over to a watering hole where they subsequently drank. They were joined by a couple of big males that were just tucked up in the mapani. We didn't even realise. These two guys on the left here that you can see. The young male on the right that you can see with the warthog, that's a separate sighting altogether. We were out, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was kind of middle of the day. It must have been 35 degrees. I think we were out there in September, and spotted 3 or 4 lions just resting up under an acacia tree. And we were quite pleased because they were flat out, just to have spotted them at a distance of about 100 yards, something like that. But a family of warthogs hadn't seen them and just made their way straight towards these lions. And this young male was quickly onto one of the young warthogs and caught him. And yeah, it was all over in a matter of minutes. And he was later chased off by one of the big males. But it was fascinating to see. It was typical of the kind of experiences that you can have out in the Delta. Now, like most cats, lions do not like water, and with there being so much water in the Delta, they do have to cross these channels, but they do it very, begrudgingly. And you can almost see the disdain in the look and the look of these lionesses as they're crossing this water. And yes, they hate water, but it's also dangerous for them. There's lots of crocodiles in the Delta, and so they are putting themselves at risk at this time. Now, for the most part, the lions will largely target the buffalo through much of the season in the Delta. But as we get towards the end of the dry season, so when we're getting into September, October, we can be getting temperatures, 40 degrees plus, and the vegetation dies off. It becomes very dry, very dusty, and this weakens the herbivores to the extent that they are more vulnerable. And this time that the lions will often target elephants, and this has been recorded in Moremi and in Chobe, and it's not something I've seen firsthand. I've had clients that have seen it, and obviously the guides have witnessed it on several occasions, well, more than that, but it's quite a brutal thing to witness. I'm not sure that I would want to see it. There's obviously a hell of a struggle that goes on, but ultimately that elephant is going to sustain the pride for several days, if not longer. And more than that, it will feed numerous other species in the area. So, the vultures, 3 or 4 species of vulture will fly in from South Africa, even, hundreds of miles just to feed on the carcasses within the Delta. And love them or hate them, it will, inevitably attract spotted hyena. And this is an animal that you quite often encounter at the Delta. I happen to be a big fan of spotted hyenas. I just think they're a little bit misunderstood. So I've got hundreds of photos of them. And if you're a hyena fan like me, then be sure to mention it to the guide, because very often these guides do know where there's den sites. You can go along, and if you're lucky, in the early morning or in the late afternoon, the cubs will be emerging and just playing around the entrance, and you can get some fabulous views, and they are super little creatures. Now, the Delta is also amazing for leopards. I know that there are plenty of people who will argue that Sathloengwa in Zambia is the best place for leopards, but for me, it's the Delta every time. And it's a species which, whilst famed for its elusiveness, it can be seen very reliably in the Delta. And myself and many of the clients and groups have spent hours in the company of these beautiful animals. This photo was captured one of our best of Botswana trips. It was in August in 2019, and the group saw an incredible 12 different individuals over the course of their 9-night stay. This is a couple of pics of a male leopard that was feeding on impala, not 20, well, no, probably about 200 meters from where we were camping. And due to the fabulous kind of spotting skills of our guide, he was able to spot this guy, and we pulled over, tucked ourselves away, and we were able to spend the whole morning. No other vehicles came by. And this is, this is something which the Delta offers. There's not many places in the world where you can spend, an entire morning with a leopard without anybody else joining you. Some more shots from some of our trips over the years. So the one on the right here is one of my favourite of all time. I think that's just incredible. With the cub and the mother sat behind, and then the sun setting in the distance. But it's one thing to kind of see an animal and to tick it off, but it's all about spending time with these creatures and observing them in their natural habitat and completely on their terms. And it's such a special thing to do. These are just some more shots from over the years, just of the cub and the female. This image here was actually, I think it was my first ever leopard in the Delta, in Moremi, about 10 years ago. And we were just packing up camp actually, and then heard the impala alarm calling, and it was a hell of a racket, only about 500 meters away. So we jumped in the vehicle, drove over there, and this young male leopard was just finishing one of the male impala. By the time we took this photo, the impala was dead, and he kind of recovered his strength and got his breath back before carting the impala off and concealing it under a bush. But it was a fabulous sighting. And with the impala still present, they were probably only 20 yards away, the rest of the herd, and they were just standing there, just barking, just staring straight at the leopard. You couldn't really miss it. But often it can be a lot more subtle than that. It can be the chirp of a squirrel or a bird, that gives away the fact that there's a leopard hiding in the vegetation. And on occasions, it's just pure luck. And this brings me on to this photo. This is one of the most incredible sightings I've ever heard about. And it was witnessed by a couple of clients of ours traveling on one of our group trips. So there would have been 4 or 5 of them, in fact, but the 2 clients in particular are very well known to me. And they always seem to be lucky. I think they're tuning in tonight. But they were sitting there, it was mid-afternoon, and they were watching some baboons just jumping over some water channels or coming down to drink. And then out of nowhere, a big male leopard came flying out and took the dominant male baboon. It was an incredible sighting. There was the struggle. Male baboons are big animals, and between the leopard, the initial fight, and then I believe the leopard actually drowned the baboon. But all the time, you had the rest of the troop around this, just going absolutely ballistic. And like I said, these clients are very well travelled, but they said it was really quite a harrowing experience, but very special nevertheless. On that trip, actually, they did go on to see pangolin as well, which is just ridiculous. And I haven't even got a slide for pangolin, because I think in the 10 years that I've kind of been overseeing trips to Botswana, we've only had a handful of sightings, so it's not something which you can realistically expect to see. But yeah, I think they saw 2 pangolin mating later on in that trip. It was ridiculous. That was in June a couple of years ago. Now, of the 3 big cats present in the Delta, I'd say that cheetah are the most difficult to see. And you do need a slice of luck to see them. We've seen them on about 50% of our trips, I would suggest. I've always been lucky enough to see them, but they're not easy. And I think that's largely because there are so many lions around. There's hyenas, there's leopards, and these guys will all push cheetah off very quickly. If you are lucky enough to catch up with a cheetah, first thing in the morning, they do hunt during the daylight hours. So if you stick with it, you've got a good chance of seeing some hunting activity. Now, African wild dogs or painted dogs have to be one of my favourite species, and indeed it was this animal that first brought me to Botswana 10 years ago. Prior to joining the wildlife travel industry, my wife and I worked on a couple of conservation projects in South Africa, and the extent of our safari experience was really doing self-drives around Kruger. We'd go for a couple of weeks at a time, stay in the government rest camps, and we'd drive 16 hours a day, and we absolutely loved that. We had some fantastic sightings, but we always seemed to miss out on the wild dogs. We'd spend whole days looking for these animals. We'd look at all of their sightings boards and stuff, work out a plan, and lo and behold, we'd get back at the end of the day and would find out that they've been in camp, they've been running through the camp, or we'd overhear somebody in the restaurant moaning about how they hadn't seen any cats, they'd just seen some feral dogs. And you just think, oh my word, what's going on here? And so we did a load of research and we decided on Botswana. And this is my first ever wild dog, and it was a female just standing over a den. And I'll never forget the day. It was absolutely magnificent. We were so happy. But I've been lucky enough to see wild dogs on countless occasions since, not just in Botswana but also in Zambia, South Africa. You never tire of watching them. This is a photo of some pups from September on a couple of years ago. A couple of adults from, I think this was a July trip, again, probably 3 or 4 years ago. But the dogs they are such an interesting species to watch. So much behaviour, so much interaction. They will sleep a lot during the day, but then you'll get to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's almost like somebody's flipped a switch and they're suddenly, interested in hunting. They'll get up, they'll socialise a bit, perhaps go to the loo, and then they'll just set off at a trot and just start covering the land until they see a herd of impala, a kudu, a lechwe, something like that, and then they'll just hare after it. And it's just, all hell breaks loose. But it's fascinating to witness. As many of you all know, if the cats are seen by a prey animal, an impala or something like that, they will give an alarm call. There's no such kind of reaction with the dogs. If they see the dogs, they just run. That's their best chance of escape, because the dogs will just chase them down otherwise. And when you've got, packs of 20, 30 animals, which is what you get in the Delta, they have to eat so frequently that you've got a very good chance of watching them hunting. We do trips, dedicated to watching wild dogs. And if you really want to see them, your best bet is to go in June or July when they are denning. The pups will still be back at the den, and the adults will have to return with food to feed them. If you can access that den site, then you've got a super chance of seeing them and also seeing them hunting. Now, the dogs will just chase the antelope, whatever it may be, over the land and just keep with it, just relentless. This often sees them driving those antelope species into the water. The dogs won't usually follow in because of the risk of crocodiles, but obviously the prey animal then ends up falling victim as well. But they are just my favourite, of everything you can see in the Delta. It has to be the dogs, and I've been lucky enough to see them every time I've been out there, in Moremi, in Kwai Concession, and in Chobe. So if you want dogs, go to. Now, I've focused a lot on the mammals there, but the bird life of the Delta is also very impressive. You've got, as you would imagine, vast numbers of water birds. You've got African spoonbills, you've got yellow-billed storks, saddle-billed stork, little jacanas and stuff. And out in the grasslands, you've got this beautiful Kori bustard. It's the world's heaviest flying bird, and secretary birds as well, and also lilac-breasted rollers. It's an absolutely beautiful bird, and they're so common out there that people become almost kind of complacent about them, which is disgraceful. But it's just a fabulous place, the Delta. And I have to admit, it took me, I think it was 3 or 4 trips to Botswana before I was able to tear myself away from the Delta and to visit some of the other areas that Botswana has for wildlife. And they don't come any bigger really than the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, which at over 52,000 square kilometres is the second largest game reserve in the world. And it's a complete contrast to the Delta. This is an area of wide open grasslands, of scrubby habitats, and it's essentially a semi-arid desert. But with the arrival of the rains in December, January, February, it does transform, and for a couple months it becomes very green, and this subsequently attracts a range of species. You've got beautiful, eloquent kind of gemsbok or oryx out on those plains feeding on the grasses, and they're often alongside giraffe, and small herds of springbok as well. And it's not uncommon for all 3 species to be found feeding alongside one another. The springbok in particular are cracking little animals. They're always good value. They obviously display that honking behaviour where they throw themselves up into the air up to 3 metres and extend their legs. And this is really a display of fitness. It's just saying, look, predators out there, don't even bother. I'm jumping all the way up here. Look at me. And it's also saying to the girls, come on, I'm a pretty fit chap. Maybe consider me as a mate. I don't know what I'm talking about. In addition to the springbok, you have also got kudu. These tend to be in the more scrubbier areas, and then at the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got tiny springbok. It's a species which is well known for trying to conceal its whereabouts by burying its dung, and also it will even take to aardvark burrows as well, just to try and remain out of view. Out on those plains alongside the ungulates, you've got ostriches, you've got secretary birds, and the corybustids that we looked at before. Now, it does get warm down here, there's no denying it, and it can get hot, particularly in the middle of the day. And in the middle of the day, it does go quiet. A lot of the herbivores will go under the trees and stuff to seek shade. So if you're looking to see some of the area's predators, then you've really got a couple of hours first thing and a couple of hours at the end of the day as well. And at this time, this is when the predators are on the prowl. This is a female cheetah that we saw initially first thing in the morning. She was hunting the springbok, but she wasn't successful. We went off for a drive, explored some other areas, and returned in the late afternoon. And she'd actually caught one of the springbok and was just finishing off when we arrived. But you can see how full her belly is, and that's because she's very nervous. As I said before, they're easily pushed off their kills, so they have to eat very quickly and have to eat as much as they can, really, and as short a time of period as possible. So yeah, it was a lovely little sighting, and we were just chuffed to see that she'd caught something, but she was very nervous, and it's with good reason, because the area is home to lions, and specifically the black-maned lions of the Kalahari, which are some of the most famous in the world. Due to the low density of prey species out here, and in particular the absence of buffalo, it's just too dry to sustain buffalo. The prides are much smaller than what you might encounter in the delta. You're looking at animals, 4, 5, 6, something like that to a pride. But when you do see them, they are magnificent. We really struggled with the first few days. We'd hear them every night, but just couldn't catch up with them. And then on the next couple of days, we did have a bit more luck. Now, it was really quite a sinister sight, seeing the lions taking to these plains with the gemsbok in the background. Just knowing, that they're off hunting, you couldn't help but feel for the gemsbok. But that's the way it goes. But if you're desperate to see cats, big cats, and to see lots of them, then it's difficult not to recommend the delta. But the Central Kalahari just offers a very different experience, and I would say it's more a case of kind of quality over quantity, and it's also home to some very different mammals which you won't see in the delta, and this includes this fellow. It's a brown hyena, which we saw on our first morning. It's a species that I was desperate to see, and one which is largely nocturnal, so you just have that small window at first light and later on in the afternoon. They're hopeless hunters. They'll only catch about 5% of their prey, and the rest of the time they scavenge, or they eat insects, or even fruit and nuts. Now, like spotted hyenas, they do occur in small clans, so if you can find a den site, then you obviously have a good chance of seeing them. As you might expect, black-backed jackals are common out in the Kalahari, and the sound of them calling at night is almost kind of quite a distinctive feature of the Kalahari. You've got bat-eared foxes, again, quite common out on the grasslands. They'll be out hunting the beetles and the sun spiders, small rodents, and so forth. Brown squirrels, these are a common sight throughout the Kalahari. And when things do quieten down during the middle of the day, when it is quite hot, the squirrels usually take over and keep you entertained. As darkness falls, the honey badgers and the nocturnal animals become active. And this guy was intent on raiding our camp and our kitchen. We found it hilarious, but it was really quite a problem for the chef. He had to keep driving him away. It was intent on getting into the fridge, and returned kind of multiple times through the night. But it's a cracking little animal. It's one of my favourite. If you're incredibly lucky, you may see caracal in the Kalahari. It's very good habitat for caracal, but I have to confess, I've not seen it out there. I know of a few guides that have, but they are around. It's just a question of luck and the timing. Finally, historically, like Central Kalahari was never a place for wild dogs, but in recent years, a couple of packs have set up residence in Deception Valley, and we were lucky enough to see them on our final morning as we were leaving, called in at a watering hole, and there was a pack of 8, and it was just a really delightful way to finish up our time in the Kalahari. Now, I'm now going to just move on to Makgadikgadi and Naipan national parks, which, as you can see from this figure, are just in the middle there between the Delta and the Kalahari in the south. And this is a cracking little reserve. It's about 5,000 square kilometres, but it's a reserve or a park of contrasts. In the west, on the banks of the Teti River, the vegetation is rich and green, and it can be a little bit like the Delta. You can get large congregations of elephant and giraffe, wildebeest, zebra, and antelope species, and obviously the predators that accompany them. But as you travel out east, it opens up into vast grasslands and enormous salt pans, and these salt pans actually account for about a fifth of the park. And for much of the year, they look just like this. They're quite desolate places. They don't really sustain any life, but with the rains in January, February, these areas are just transformed overnight. Grass emerges, the pans fill up, and you subsequently get massive movements of zebra, which actually come down from the Delta. So this is in March time that this migration is taking place. And it's a very interesting story because it actually ceased in the late 60s with the erection of veterinary fences to the north of the reserve. That the zebra could no longer migrate, and it wasn't until 2006 that these fences were taken down. But that migration has resumed, and now you get about 30,000 animals coming down, and it's really quite a spectacle. As you might imagine, they do attract predators, but the experience of seeing these predators is not like what you might find in the Delta. Certainly out in the east of the park, you don't get a huge number of visitors, and that's kind of demonstrated by this lioness here. We saw her catch a zebra foal, and then as we went to approach, this was from about 80 yards away, she started snarling at us and mock charged us, and we pulled right back to probably about 100 yards, and that was a distance that she was comfortable at. But that's kind of almost unheard of in the Delta for an animal to react that way, and that's because they are so unused to seeing humans and seeing vehicles. And the same could be said for the cheetah as well. We saw cheetah on a couple of occasions, but they were quite skittish and moved off. You know, they did not hang around. So if you really want to see the big cats, the Delta is your best bet, but you wouldn't really visit Makgadikgadi for them necessarily. It's a different experience and offers a different range of species, a bit like the Kalahari. And those open grasslands, they're dotted with termite mounds, and therefore they provide very good habitat for two incredibly desirable termite-loving species. And the first of these is the meerkat. Now, we were lucky enough to find a couple of family groups of about 10 individuals, but they can number up to about 30, and they're fantastic to watch. We would pull up maybe about 20 or 30 yards away, so it wasn't like how you see on TV where you can pull in and sit in amongst them. These are completely wild meerkats. There are some lodges on that eastern boundary that have habituated meerkats, so they still live wild, but they're used to having people around. And in those instances, you can go and sit with them and observe them, and that must be amazing. But I wasn't party to that. We just watched them from a distance, but absolutely loved it. Now, the second kind of termite-loving species of the area is aardwolf, and this is actually our main reason for visiting Makgadikgadi. It's the smallest member of the hyena family, and it feeds exclusively on termites, up to 300,000 a night. They are largely nocturnal, so you need a bit of luck to see them. In this instance, we were out looking for the meerkats, and we found this fellow just tucked in at the entrance to the den. Now, the bird life out in Makgadikgadi is super. You've just got these vast open plains, so you can see for miles around, and it's very good for raptors. Good numbers of martial eagle, good numbers of bateleur. You've also got your cory bustards, your secretary birds, loads of ostrich as well. So it's a lovely place to visit. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best option for your first visit to Botswana, but certainly 2 or 3 trips in, it's worth including, or indeed combining it with the Delta.
Dan, sorry to interrupt you, it's Chris.
Yes.
Can I just ask you, can you just try and stay a little bit closer to the mic? I do apologise for interrupting.
Right, no. Yeah, I do apologise. Yeah, sorry.
Very slightly if you're a bit further away.
Yep, no, sure.
Go for it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, so sorry about that, guys. Yeah, looked like I'd moved a bit too far back. So the night sky in Makgadikgadi is remarkable. There's so little light pollution around there that if you drive out onto the pans and look up, it just is stunning. The Milky Way there is there before you, and then you've got all the constellations as well. And a lot of the lodges out here will offer the opportunity to go out and sleep out under the stars. And if you get the opportunity, it's an absolute must. Now, outside of the national parks, there's still a wealth of wildlife to be found. And this is one of the things which makes Botswana such a fabulous place. And even if you're driving between reserves, you're still likely to see a good number of species. You're likely to bump into elephants and so forth. And in fact, in some of these unprotected areas, on the edges of villages or on cultivated land, it can be easier to see some species. So one such location is Lake Ngami, which is about 90 minutes southwest of Maun. And we stopped here for a couple of nights when we were going down to the Kalahari. And during the day, there's not a huge amount to do. It is, really kind of just farmland around this lake. You can do some birding, and it's very good for that. But it's really as dusk falls that things get interesting, because you can go out and you can drive around, and it's actually really, really good for some of the smaller nocturnal mammals. So we had African wildcat, we had lesser bush baby, we had porcupine, striped polecat, we had large spotted genet, Selous mongoose, and finally this chap. It was an aardvark, obviously, and we saw them, aardvarks, on both evenings that we were at Lake Ngami. And on that first evening, this particular individual was really quite tolerant. So we were able to get out of the vehicle and watch him from about 30 metres away. I managed to get a bit of footage. I'm not sure how this is going to appear on your screen. It was just such a cool sighting. It's one of my favourite animals. And because you haven't got the predators around, because you haven't got the leopards, the lions, then the aardvarks actually tend to do quite well. And so, yeah, you've got a good chance of seeing them in these more kind of cultivated areas. Now, for me, it doesn't get any better than seeing an aardvark in Botswana. And if you love your wildlife, I'd really urge you to consider a visit to this beautiful country. Now, on that note, I'm going to thank you all for listening, and perhaps see if we have any questions. Chris, I don't know if you're still there.
Yeah. No, I'm still here. I'm still here. Botswana's just gone to the top of my list, Dan, of places I want to go to. Thank you very, very much for that. Gosh, that's absolutely fantastic. First of all, I'm just going to apologise slightly. I know one or two people were having some sound issues, but goodness gracious, that was a really wonderful presentation. I know that everyone would agree with me, clearly from someone who has an extraordinary passion for Botswana. I'll challenge you. We're going to have a Botswana-Zambia duel one day. Hey, look, we've got lots of questions, and we certainly don't have time for them all. But I am going to begin with something that you touched on, but perhaps get you to answer more specifically, if that would be all right. This question is from David Munro Jones, who says that he would welcome insights into what you might wear on safari in the Delta in August. A possible issue of luggage limitations, camera and binoculars. I know, Dan, when you travel, you always carry your suit and tie. And
I do, absolutely. It's the only time I wear it. It's not dissimilar to what we're wearing now, Chris. The shirts, the light shirts are very good. In August, you're going to be looking at temperatures probably 25, 30 degrees during the middle of the day, but it will still be getting a bit cooler at night. So you want a fleece in the evenings, you want a hat, like I've got on here, you'll need your shades. Definitely take binoculars. If you're going on a charter flight, one of the small flights into the Delta, then you will be restricted on baggage. You'll be restricted probably to about 20 kgs. If you're doing one of our group trips where we drive into the Delta, you'll have more than that. You'll have your standard baggage allowance for your international flight, and then whether it's 5 or 10 kgs for your hand baggage. But definitely take bins, take a camera, a fleece for the evening, and then shorts or light trousers during the day. That's it, really. I also, to be honest, I'll take a good pair of walking boots. There's lots of thorns and stuff, so you don't want to be walking around, in something which doesn't provide a bit of protection. But it's good to have a pair of flip-flops or sandals just for in the tent or around the lodge as well. That's a worthwhile thing to take. Chris, I don't know if you've anything to add to that at all?
No, I mean the most valuable thing to take with you when you're on safari is your binoculars, isn't it? I mean, you know, the best memories are the ones that you, or the best photographs are the ones that you store in your mind. The memories of the trip. That's what I always think. I think that's you know, great. Take out outstanding photographs as well, but binos are about the best. We've got another great question here from Karen, who says, is it possible to do a hot air ballooning safari in Botswana? And if so, where can it be done from? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you can. There's a couple of places. I would need to look it up if I'm honest, Karen. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know it is an option. And I'm pretty sure it's possibly in Moremi, very likely in Chobe as well. It's not something which we tend to include on our trips, but some of the lodges out there do offer it. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'll come back to you on that, Karen. But yes, it is a possibility.
Okay, so that's cool. So Botswana is known, I think, as being quite an expensive destination if you want to stay in a lodge. And Hilary has asked whether it's possible to stay somewhere other than an uber expensive lodge. And of course, you've spoken about the camping side of things, but are there some lodges that are less expensive than totally crazy prices?
Yeah, it's tricky. In high season, that those rates really go up enormously. And the cheapest, for want of a better word, lodge that I'm aware of would probably be around the $500 or $600 mark per person per night in September. As I say, if you can be a bit more flexible with dates and perhaps consider going in shoulder season, either in April, May, or indeed in November, those rates come down massively. And even for the really expensive lodges, they come down. And I think that represents really, really good value at those times. So that's probably your best bet. Or what you can do, if you've got time on your side, if you're willing to spend a significant amount of time at one lodge, an extended period, so 6 or 7 nights, or perhaps to combine 2 sister lodges, and do 8 nights, so 4 nights at each, then you can negotiate deals there. That's probably your best bet. But yeah, the Delta in particular is an expensive place. Yeah.
It's certainly true, but it's certainly worth it, I would say. I mean, crikey, having been lucky enough to go myself, I think it's breathtaking. So yeah,
it is. I mean, it sounds awful, but you get what you pay for, and these lodges which charge these high rates, they're on enormous private concessions. Of 250,000 hectares, and this is massive. Sabi Sands in South Africa sits on about 70,000 hectares. I think there's about 100 lodges on it, and that gives you some perspective. That's why they have to charge these high rates, because they have levies and stuff. So, but the experience is incredible. Yeah.
So Dan, that's fantastic. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that Chris Jackson has asked us. One is, how do you get from the international airport into the Okavango Delta, which I think is a great question. And combined with that, could you perhaps just give us a quick recap on the seasons and the weather?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. So your best bet for getting to, Maun is really the gateway to the Delta. And your best bet is flying down to Johannesburg. And there's plenty of carriers which will take you from the UK down to Joburg. And then it's about a 2 or 3 hour, probably about a 2-hour flight to Maun, I think it is, off the top of my head. And then from Maun, as I mentioned before, you can either drive up into the Delta, and that's about 3 hours, or you can take a short flight, which may be anything from about 20 minutes, up to 40 minutes. And in terms of seasonality, you have the rains. If we start from the rains, which fall, they start kind of gathering and falling in November. They'll continue through till December, January, February, and generally start to dry up in March. And then April, May, it's nice and green out there, but shouldn't be anywhere near as wet. And then as we get into June, that's when it really starts to dry out, and it will dry out from June through till October, and it gets progressively hotter. So June, you're looking at temperatures maybe 20, 25 degrees, something like that in the middle of the day, but it will get cold at night. It can get close to freezing at night. As you get into August and September, it starts to warm up a little bit at night. And then during the day, you're looking around 30, low 30, something like that. And then September, October, you can be looking at temperatures of 35, 40 degrees. And it'll get down to, 15, 20 at night. So it's very comfortable at night, but it is quite warm. But that does offer, fantastic kind of game viewing at that time, because it's much drier. And what water is left, the animals have to gather around there. So it does offer some magnificent sightings. I personally, I quite like going a little bit earlier. I do like June and July. I like it a bit, I like it nice and warm in the day, but I like it to cool down at night. And I love sitting around the fire, and you're given hot water bottles at night, and there's duvets and stuff, so it's plenty warm enough.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you a question from Paul and Kathy. Paula, you very kindly posed us two. If it's all right, I think I'm only going to ask Dan one of them, because the question about playing cricket in the Okavango Delta and damaging your back is a different question altogether. Dan, where's the best place that you would say in Botswana? Where's the best place to see pangolin?
So we need to inform everybody else here that the couple that have inquired about this are the couple that saw the leopard with the baboon in the water, and also went on to see pangolin, and they know that it grates on me slightly that they went on that one trip and saw pangolin, and I've been on countless trips and still not seen pangolin. So it's such a difficult animal to see. If you are going to see it, you need to do what these guys have done and go in June. That's your best bet, I would suggest, June, July. And I believe your sighting was when they were mating, so you had two pangolins, not just one, which is just greedy. Yeah.
That is greedy. Yeah, that's really greedy. The other thing about your wonderful presentation, Dan, that really knocked me was that at the end you showed a fantastic aardvark. I've been going to Africa for at least as long as you have, and probably as many times as you have, and I've never seen aardvark. And but hey ho, I'll get there one day. Hey, look, we're running out of time. So the last question that I'm going to pose to you, which has come from one or two people, is: are you leading any trips yourself? Why would they want to go with you? Completely.
Yeah, that's very kind of them to ask. Yes, I have got a trip lined up in June in 2022. So it's still a little way off, and the details are in the latest brochure. But that's going to be a combination, actually, of mobile camping, 3 nights in Maremi, 3 nights in Kwai, and then we're going to go to a lodge in a private concession just on the edge of Maremi Game Reserve. It's on a beautiful concession, and we've got 3 nights there, exclusive use of it. So yeah, it's going to be a super trip. Yeah, just slightly more relaxing option than doing the mobile camping all the way through.
Will you be wearing that hat?
This hat goes with me everywhere, Chris. This is a safari hat. I've not been able to wear it for a while, so it has to come out tonight.
Hey, look, Dan, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I might be on that trip myself, actually. And to everybody that has joined us this evening, thank you very, very much. We're always enormously grateful to you all for taking time to spend your evenings with us, to listen to our speakers and to learn, hopefully, some interesting, nice and exciting things about some of the wonderful places that we offer holidays to. Please don't forget to ask us about our brochure. If you'd like a copy of the brochure and you don't already have it, then please feel free to pop us an email or go online. And if you want to chat to me or Dan about Botswana or any of our sales team, you're very, very welcome to do so. You can get Dan. We will make sure you get Dan's email address and mine and the sales guys, so that we can follow up on some of the other questions that have been asked that we haven't had time to pose to Dan. But thank you very, very much once again for taking the time and trouble to join us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.